Up-and-coming Chargers coach Frank Smith, the offensive line coach, is headed to Miami to be their new offensive coordinator, but the Chargers already might have a replacement in mind who has ties with offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi, and there's some big lessons to take away from the Super Bowl for the Chargers, including how the Bengals failed Joe Burrow.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we have been covering the Chargers for over 6 seasons. This is our 5th as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day, the only daily Chargers content you guys are going to be finding, and all on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from, for free on all platforms. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of those places, as well as and also hitting us up at Dan Talk Sports for me on Twitter, and Dro Talk SD for David Drogemeyer. But David, a lot to get into on today's show. News, and not the good kind, for the Chargers, as Frank Smith, a really up-and-coming coach who did a tremendous job for the Chargers with their offensive line, is going to Miami, and the Chargers have a big hole there from a guy who was really, really impressive. But we already know who could potentially be coming in to fill that role, and it's somebody that Joe Lombardi is very familiar with, and we'll talk about who is next for the Chargers with their offensive line coach. And we also wanted to get into our Super Bowl takeaways and lessons for the Chargers, including how important it is that they protect Justin Herbert, like the Bengals failed to do for Joe Burrow in that game, and how important that was. And we'll also talk about just the Rams going all in and getting it, the Chargers needing to go all in and bring in some more pass rushers and impact players on the defensive side. Because guess what, guys? Defense still wins championships, and we've seen the offensive line and defensive lines play huge factors in the last 2 Super Bowl winners at least. But David, let's start here with some big news for the Chargers as they lose a guy that was very well regarded on this team, a guy that did a great job with the Oakland Raiders as their tight ends coach, also had ties with the New Orleans Saints and being their assistant offensive line coach for a long time down in New Orleans, and did a tremendous job this year for the Chargers in turning around one of the most unturnaroundable units in the league with where the bar was set from these previous regimes. And the Chargers add a lot of talent, but there's no doubt in my mind, David, that a big part of that was Frank Smith. And he just was so impressive so early on. And to take those guys that he did that with, even though they added a lot of talent to that position, and get the results that they got in 2021, that was an impressive guy, a guy I think that hurts to lose.
Yeah, I definitely think this is a big loss for the Chargers because this offensive line, no matter the type of moves that you make, it's all about chemistry. I mean, and I think that's, really prevalent throughout many different sports. You look at basketball, you can look at the Lakers who, tried to collect all of the best talent out there. And unfortunately, they're not really seeing the type of results that they're looking for because they haven't really found that chemistry. The Chargers, fortunately, I think they did find some chemistry on their offensive line this year. And I think a large part of that has to do with the guidance that they received. And I think you have to just look at some of the contributions he got out of players that you didn't really expect to get that from. So the Chargers offensive line went from a unit that was one of the worst in the NFL to a very, very respectable unit. I think they honestly went from probably a bottom 30 offensive line to, probably a top 10, 15 offensive line in the matter of 1 year.
And by bottom 30, you mean 30th or worse, not
exactly as in one of the worst in the league to at least respectable in the course of one season. Yeah, so I think the offensive line coach deserves some credit for that turnaround for sure.
Huge credit. And Sean Sarrett, earns a lot of credit as well. And I mean, we thought that he would potentially get promoted to the full-time, offensive line coach. But Frank Smith was also the run game coordinator for the Chargers as well, which puts another kind of position up there for other teams to potentially, other coaches to potentially take on for the Chargers going forward. Maybe they give it to one of these other guys that's been tried, targeted by these teams to get poached to go to different coaching staffs. But I do think Frank Smith is a huge loss. I just think that with what you were talking about in the chemistry, and also just what we saw from the Chargers development-wise, like how quickly Rashawn Slater turned into an all-pro left tackle.
Immediately.
Slater had the goods. I mean, Slater had the goods, don't get me wrong. And being next to a Matt Filer, being next to a Corey Linsley helps out a lot. Frank Smith has to get some of the credit. You know what I mean? Like he did a lot of that. I mean, as far as getting him up to date with what the Chargers wanted to do with their offensive line, because that can change from place to place, especially from college to pros,
Well, yeah, he
especially
had
when
all
you've
the
taken a year
ability, but
off.
he still had to learn a completely new offense with completely new concepts, and he had to learn that in the matter of a few months. And he learned it, and he went out there and executed at one of the highest levels we've ever seen at in a Chargers offensive line.
Well, and I mean, the thing is there's not a single Chargers offensive lineman this year that played 50% or more snaps for them last year, right? I mean, that's the crazy thing. Rashawn Slater,
Startling,
brand new. Matt Filer, brand new. Corey Linsley, brand
brand
new.
new,
Odea Abushi, right? They
brand
brought
new.
in. Michael Schofield didn't play for the team in 2020, So this was something that was a real reclamation project that he took over, and it ended up turning into a really good unit. And, I think something that helped the Chargers kind of unlock a big part of that top 5 offense. And he was
Oh
still
yeah,
dealing with a lot too, right? I mean, Storm Norton wasn't great for a lot of this season. Michael Schofield had his bad days. You had Senio Clemente out there for a
yeah.
moment. But like I think this also just shows you this offseason specifically how hard other teams are going to try to come for the Chargers offensive coaching staff, especially under a defensive head coach in Brandon Staley. And because you have a top 5 offensive unit. So we've seen Joe Lombardi did try to get poached. One of the guys that was in line to potentially get the Houston Texans coaching job. You have Kevin Coker almost going to Denver to be their offensive coordinator. And now you see Frank Smith going from offensive line coach and run game coordinator to getting a big promotion up to being the Dolphins offensive coordinator. And I think
Good
that's just,
problem to have, man.
and it's
It's a
a
good problem to
testimony
have.
to what the coaching staff that Brandon Staley put together. And I think it's
Exactly.
one of those things that's going to continue. I mean, as long as the Chargers are doing well on offense and as long as they have Justin Herbert, you
They're
expect them
going to
to
be
be doing
doing
big
well.
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is definitely a shining light of what the Chargers offensive unit has done and has done for this coaching staff too. I mean, a lot of high profile offensive weapons on this Chargers team that had some of their best seasons of their careers. Guys like Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, still providing really good production. Austin Eckler with 20 touchdowns. The Chargers having an efficient running game, having one of the best passing offenses in the NFL. I think all of that with a brand new offense. You have to give some credit to the players, of course, but you also got to give some credit to the coaching staff who kind of guided all of that talent in the right direction, guided that talent into a top 5, very, very exciting and very dominant offense for the Chargers.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising that Shane Day didn't get a lot more looks than he did, during
Yeah.
this last cycle. I mean, that part's a little bit surprising because, I mean, the Chargers tight end coach and their offensive line coach are getting huge promotions to
Well, look what
offensive
it did for
coordinator.
Pep Hamilton, too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Pep Hamilton, I mean, he still didn't really get the shine we thought he would, right? Coming
Yeah.
off of what he was able to do with Justin Herbert. And now he's the offensive coordinator for the Texans, which is probably 1 year too late,
Yeah.
considering how impressive his performance was with Justin Herbert. And Herbert gets a lot of the credit too. But the crazy thing is, David, is the news never comes out in good times for us, but there is already a rumor about who will take that position over for the Chargers. A name I wasn't super familiar with, admittedly, but a guy that has ties to the Chargers coaching staff because Gilbert Manzano from the OC Register put on Twitter, hearing Chargers are looking to hire Brendan Nugent as their offensive line coach per source. Nugent had that role with the Saints last year, and this is a guy obviously very familiar with Joe Lombardi, very familiar with the offense the Chargers are trying to run and the concepts that they're going to be trying to run for the most part. So this is something, David, where it's hard to judge him based on last season because the Saints were so injured that you can't really get a firm grasp on it, but a guy that's been working with the Saints since 2015, has been working with the offensive line since 2016, which has continued to put out, been a factory for Pro Bowl offensive linemen like Teron Armstead, like a Ryan Ramczyk, like a Larry Warford, right? Andres Pete, 2 Pro Bowls already in his career. So like that is a place where it's okay. Yeah, I'm okay with potentially poaching some of there, even, especially more with the familiarity that you think you would have.
Yeah, you're always looking at those relationships with coaching staffs in the NFL. It's always guys that are going to be, coming from someone that you're familiar with and someone that you've worked with in the past. Those relationships, you never know when they're going to manifest themselves into other opportunities later on in their career. And this is another example here for Nugent, having worked with Joe Lombardi, who is obviously the Chargers offensive coordinator. You always want that familiarity. You want somebody who knows the offensive concepts, which are a major part of this Chargers offense that we know, obviously. And I think, yes, you look at the Saints offensive line last year, you look at the numbers, and you say, oh, that really wasn't that impressive.
Yeah.
But I think some context here from PFF is definitely necessary. The Saints have had relatively settled offensive line personnel, but they were forced to use 13 different offensive linemen last season, with 9 of them playing at least 133 snaps. So they did not have a lot of continuity. And, like we talked about before, chemistry is very important. And it's really hard to establish chemistry when you don't have the same guys going out there playing next to each other, snap in and snap out.
Yeah, and I mean, before that, their line was always pretty good. Besides just the
Yeah.
Pro Bowlers, I mean, 2020 top 10 in pass and run block win rate. 2019, 3 Pro Bowlers that I mentioned. 2020, they were also 4th in run blocking and 12th in adjusted sacks given up. So, I mean, it is a respectable unit, and he was very close with Dane Campbell, who was the offensive line coach before he took in on the Detroit Lions head coaching job. But I think what makes you feel really good about it is knowing that when Joe Brady, former New Orleans Saints coach, went to the Carolina Panthers to be their offensive coordinator, he wanted to bring along this guy, I mean, that worked with him in New Orleans, right? So he wanted to see a familiar face over there. And they blocked Brendan Nugent from actually going over there and trying to be their offensive line coach. So they were trying to keep him in the building for sure. We'll probably get Ross Jackson, get his thoughts on it from Locked On Saints to hear how we should kind of feel about this if it goes down, because it just is a rumor at this point. But connect the dots. It seems like a pretty vivid picture of this guy, the Chargers wanting him and having him make a lot of sense with Sean Payton leaving as well, right? And that could have a lot to do with it and how that decided, maybe he gets a promotion, so maybe they can't block it because now he could be the run game coordinator. So it's technically a promotion because you can't go laterally. You can't go offensive line coach to offensive line coach without the team at least having a chance to block it. And the Chargers wanted Kevin O'Connell last year from the Rams to be their offensive coordinator.
Blocked.
They nixed that really quick, and now he's the Vikings head coach. But Brandon Staley, I think, does deserve credit for this staff these put together. I'm excited to see who they bring in to fill that spot because that dude was doing a lot development-wise too. Trey Pipkins, Scott Questenberry looked decent. Michael Schofield looked pretty decent. Like, working some magic for sure in the Chargers offensive line. And that is something that let the Bengals down on the biggest stage and throughout the postseason, even though they were able to win a lot of games, not being able to protect Joe Burrow. It definitely came up, back to bite them in the ass in the biggest game of the year and on the final play of the biggest game with a chance to win the Super Bowl. It came back to bite them. So we're going to get into that and other Super Bowl lessons coming up after this. But I did have a ton of fun betting with the official betting sponsor of the Locked On Chargers podcast, BetOnline.net, for the big game. I had so much money running around with BetOnline.net. So many great prop bets to pick from. I mean, so much good stuff at BetOnline.net always. And now that football season's over, it's okay, guys, because they're still your home from all college and pro basketball. You have the NHL still going on. You have UFC fights. You have baseball when it comes back. Even right to your favorite Vegas casino games, BetOnline.net is the place to go. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all of your sports betting needs, and they remain the best spot for all the sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Head to the website today, and you guys can use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action going on in the sporting worlds, and you always want to make sure you're doing it with the best place to place all of your bets, and that is BetOnline. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, David, well, something we've been kind of doing throughout the postseason is kind of trying to take away lessons for the Chargers from these games and familiar teams to them, right? And how the Chargers can kind of use that going forward, because that's obviously the goal. Is the Chargers, I don't think, are out of the realm of being Super Bowl contenders in 2022, right? So David's going to show off his wedding ring for those in the podcast listening audience. David's doing some visual medium stuff, but that's the whole goal, right? You're always trying to get to that.
Trying to get those rings,
and
baby.
I think there's been very poignant things that the Chargers can take away from what's doomed teams and also what's made teams get into the big dance and potentially win the Super Bowl, right?
Exactly.
With the moves that we saw. And I think it starts with seeing what happened to Joe Burrow in that final game. I mean, looking at the final play of the game, getting taken down. I mean, it wasn't a sack, but it was almost just as good as a sack on 4th and 1 with the game on the line. Aaron Donald wraps up Joe Burrow. He throws it wildly. It's incomplete and the game's over. And, Aaron Donald wins his team a championship. And it wasn't just that one, right? It was 7 sacks before that, right? And in the Tennessee game, there was 9 sacks in that game, and it was a miracle. They did, they found a way to win that game.
51 sacks that the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line gave up during the 2021 season as well. This was not just something that we saw in the playoffs. This is something that we saw from the Bengals not only this year, but we saw it last year when it really got Joe Burrow hurt. Joe Burrow tears his ACL. He's out for half the season, comes back here. The Bengals, they take a non-offensive lineman, and Joe Burrow gets his butt whooped pretty much all season long. He performed extremely well, given that chaos. But Imagine how much better he would have performed if he didn't get sacked 50 plus times.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to imagine it would be pretty good, and it's pretty obvious for the Bengals what they have to do to try to get back to that mountaintop, right? Is there's a very clear thing that has to be changed on
Yeah,
that team, and it's the offensive line being the biggest weakness. And I don't know if Penei Sewell fixes that by himself. He doesn't. And the
right.
thing is you're probably not there if you don't have Jamar Chase, who put together, the most historic season we've seen from a wide receiver. But
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, when you're talking about I think Burrow was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL by a long shot. In the NFL postseason, I think Ashil Kapadia put out, he was the most sacked quarterback of any postseason. He was sacked 19 times, most in the last 20 seasons. And he said the next closest for any quarterback that, that got sacked in the postseason was 12. And so that's a 7 sack difference. Like historically
Yee.
bad offensive line play. And I mean, you'd even think back, David, to guys like Andrew Luck, right?
Yeah,
Early retirement. I mean, that
because he
offensive
got
line,
annihilated.
yeah, for sure. And
Absolutely
over
abused.
years,
Yeah.
it was a consistent problem for them.
Yeah,
Makes me think
David
about,
Carr. And
oh
that's
yeah.
another example. That guy got absolutely destroyed in Houston. It was
Yeah.
ugly because they could not
Russell Wilson.
protect anyone.
I mean, you think that doesn't have anything to do with Russell Wilson kind
Hell
of
yeah,
being
it
over
does.
Seattle? You know what I mean? So like it was important. I think the Chargers get credit. I mean, the Chargers do get credit for what they were able to do, putting way more talent on that offensive line in 2021 than they had in
Took
the
you
10
long
years
enough.
prior. That's the thing. It's like you get credit for it, but like it's not like it was a new problem that they just fixed immediately. It was a decade
No.
old problem that got fixed for the first time under general manager Tom Telesco. So that's why it's like you
I was
can't
just
really
like to
give him all
think
the
about
flowers.
Philip Rivers is just like rolling over
Yeah.
there in Alabama, coaching his team. Like, are you kidding me? It took you this long to figure out that you need to invest in the offensive line. Like, how is this possible? How did it take you this long to put a serviceable offensive line? It's like, what could Philip Rivers have done with that type of offensive line? That I think that's what's so frustrating for someone like me who's been a Charger fan for 25 plus years.
Well, and I mean, we can't have revisionist history either, just because
Right.
it's like the Chargers did a lot of the things they had done in the past. They just happened to work this year, right? Because
Sure.
the aging free agents hadn't worked in years past. The
Right.
Brian Bulaga contract didn't work out. Orlando Franklin. King Dunlap was actually fine. Russell Okung was good for 1 year, but it's hard to say overall that ended up being well. You trade for Trey Turner, that doesn't work out as well. You tried all the draft picks that we've talked about many times. The draft wasn't working. So they just had not been able to find healthy and talented offensive linemen for a long time. I mean, the Dan Feeney, Forrest Lamp, Sam Tebby situation put together one of the worst offensive lines we've ever seen for
Yeah.
the Chargers. And they hit on all those, right? They hit on Matt Filer. They
Yeah.
hit on Corey Linsley. And I think they went after a different level of free agent and put different kinds of
Definitely.
resources into that this year. I mean, the three biggest things the Chargers did, the three biggest pieces of offseason capital that they had went to the offensive line. The second biggest
Yeah.
contract that they gave out was Matt Filer. The first biggest is Corey Linsley. Their very
Yep.
first draft pick is Rashawn Slater. Like that's how you fix things, by
Definitely.
pouring resources into it. And that's, what these good teams have done. And I
With
think
a
that's
concentrated focus on it.
one. I think the other thing, David, is it just means like you can't be done and you can't be content if you were the
Yeah.
Chargers with one good season from the offensive line, which still showed the depth issues, right? Because it was a lot better, but we still saw that there was, a couple really weak spots that could derail a game at any time. So I think
Yeah.
that's another lesson for the Chargers too, is just like, don't be content with what you had. Keep adding to that unit, keep investing resources there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you already, people who have listened to this show, they know my philosophy. They know I want the Chargers to continue to invest in the spine of their team, that offensive line. You saw the giant dividend, and I mean that can't be understated. Absolutely giant dividends that it paid in year one of that investment in the offensive line. But also shows you that it's not done. It's not over with. There's still more work that needs to be done. That right guard position, that right tackle position, that still needs to be shored up. And if you're able to mirror the production from the left side on the right side, you have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. There's definitely potential there to get better. The Chargers have the ability to make that happen. Now it's about making the right moves in order to make sure that does happen.
Yeah, and I mean, we can say whatever we want about the Chargers offensive line. Obviously, the defense took a huge step back, and defense is very finicky from year to year. It's very hard to replicate a great defense
Yeah.
for a lot of teams, and just historically, and that took a major step backwards in year one under Brandon Staley. But the offense was so good, right? And I think it was like a big part of that was the offensive line, and a big part of that was Justin Herbert and his greatness in protecting him, right? Because he was also one of the least sacked quarterbacks in the league in 2021. And his pocket presence is really, really good too, and something that's gotten a lot better over time. But like, I mean, when you're seeing Joe Burrow go down holding his knee in the Super Bowl, right? Like, if that's not, the thing that's blinking the flashing lights at you, and maybe James Rapine and them, the Locked On Bengals, would disagree as far as that. But like, I would have to assume the offseason day one show is just
scare
like,
you to death.
oh, for sure. And I'm sure it does, right? I mean, you see him go down with a season-ending injury. You almost see him go down with a Super Bowl-ending injury. That's, impossible to recover from and completely avoidable potentially just by upgrading the unit in front of him. And I think it's hard. It's going to be hard. They have some okay pieces with that offensive line. Maybe it's not a total rebuild, but there were some very, very weak spots. And as we've learned with the Chargers, many attempts to try to rebuild the offensive line, it's going to be really tough to do in one off season, right? It doesn't always come together. And even the Chargers, with much more talented, the top line talent, right?
Yeah.
Still had depth problems, right?
Definitely.
Still were in trouble when you had guys go out with COVID, and had to put in like a Senio Kelemete. Still had problems with Brian Bulaga, who, going into the season was a huge injury risk. And you had Storm Norton, who I think you got more out of him than maybe you should have as a former XFL player with no real exposure to the NFL. Still not good enough, right? So building that depth is the next thing for the Chargers. But on the flip side of that, David, like you're talking about, these teams brought in the pass rushers to get that job done. I mean, the Titans obviously have pass rushers too. Maybe the Chiefs didn't have enough pass rushers in that game outside of Chris Jones. I mean, even Melvin Ingram kind of went off in that game too and was a scary man. But the point is, though, is it's not just having a better offensive line. It's being able to get after the quarterback more because of how much of an impact that can have in a big game such as this. And I think that's another thing the Chargers can take away is adding more to the defensive line, because we saw some really talented defensive linemen, and adding some more edge rushers, two things that they will very much be able to do in 2022 if they want to. And we're going to get into that. But I do have to tell you guys that the only place you should be getting any kind of auto parts is at rockauto.com. With the ever increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain store to keep up with everything that you need. And why would you want to go in there just to go up to the counter, see that guy that seems very annoyed to be there behind the counter, and have him try to look up the part that you don't even really know what it's called? You have to walk back out to your car, go into the manual of your car, start looking things up just to go back in and tell them you don't know. Skip all of that, right? Go to rockauto.com, where you're going to find the easiest process to get the parts that you need. When you're dealing with car trouble, you don't want to have to deal with more stress, more headaches. You don't get that with rockauto.com, because when you go to the website, you can just type in the type of car you have, and a few easy clicks, you can find the part that you need. And you're going to get a great price, because if you go to the chain store, right, they're going to just give you the parts that come from the warehouse that they want to. You're not necessarily always getting the best price. Why spend 20, 30, 50% more when you can save money with rockauto.com, who has been helping do-it-yourselfers as a family business for over 20 years? Whether it's brake parts, tail lamps, whatever you need, you can find it at rockauto.com. So go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts they have available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so they know we helped you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com. All right, David, let's get back to our Super Bowl takeaways here, because it's something we've been doing throughout the playoffs. And I think, the Chargers definitely have some lessons they could learn from the Super Bowl. And I mean, one of the things we just talked about was adding more pass rushers, because the Chargers have a great one in Joey Bosa. They have another one in Uchenna Nwosu, who was really, really coming on through the end of the season, especially really fitting in with Brandon Staley's defense. But overall, it was an underwhelming pass rush, considering you have Joey Bosa. Like, if you have Joey Bosa, that's a huge step up that you have over a lot of other teams. And you just didn't get enough out of the rest of those guys, whether it's the defensive tackles. You don't have an Aaron Donald, right? And you definitely don't have a Leonard Floyd to LA's Von Miller, or something like that. So I think that is another place where you look at it and how important it was for the Rams, especially in deciding that game on Sunday and keeping the Bengals kind of locked down and keeping the Bengals in check. When the Rams offense was really struggling, they needed that defense, and they needed those defensive players on that line to come through.
Well, that's why you go out there and you get a Von Miller. That's why you go out there and get a guy who is his whole career was predicated on terrorizing quarterbacks in big moments. And he did that again in the Super Bowl. He made impact plays And that's what it takes. It's not just going to be one guy, and you understand what it takes to help free those guys up, to get those guys more one-on-one opportunities. I mean, if everyone knows it's just, hey, eliminate Joey Bosa and just double team him and chip him and get him out of the way, that they don't have anyone else, the Chargers are not going to be able to threaten us with anybody else, then it's a lot easier to game plan for. And credit to Uchenna for turning things on and really kind of sinking in and really understanding and really performing a lot better towards the end of the season. But that wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough. It had to be that from the beginning of the season. That had to be spread out through the entire year. The Chargers didn't get enough. They didn't get enough from Jerry Tillery. They didn't get enough from anyone else not named Joey Bosa. And frankly, they probably didn't get enough from Joey Bosa either, just because the amount of money they're paying him, you're expecting probably more sack numbers, honestly. I know that might be a little controversial, and I love Joey. Don't get me wrong, okay? But he needs more help. Okay? The Chargers don't have enough pass rushers. They need to add more.
Well, I think the part where you go wrong in blaming Joey Bosa is not realizing how much it helps to have other dudes like that with you, and how much, a guy like Melvin Ingram helped him in the past.
Oh, yeah.
Joey Bosa, easily a top 10 edge rusher in the league, probably a top 5 edge rusher in the league as far as overall play. I mean, people were complaining about his run stopping right this year, and he was in the top 10 of run block, win rate as far as getting past run blockers. So Joey Bosa is by far and away the least of the Chargers' worries on that defensive line. But even the best pass rushers can't get it themselves, right? The Rams weren't a good defense just because they had Aaron Donald. They're a much better defense when you get a guy like Leonard Floyd and you add Von Miller.
Weapons.
Well, and I mean, it's not even just the pass rushers. They're just going to the defensive line part of things. Like Ashawn Robinson had a huge game,
Monster.
Right? They have guys like Sebastian Joseph Dang that's come through them for the past, who's going to be a free agent. And they get a run stop on 3rd and 1 in the Super Bowl that sets up the 4th and 1 play where you end up winning the game. So, I don't think there's anything else that you could take away from that if you're the Chargers, other than, hey, we need to get more of these type of impact players. You go back a season ago, what was the storyline in that game? The Chiefs' offensive line couldn't hold up, and the Buccaneers' really talented defensive front with Shaquille Barrett and JPP and all those dudes, and Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh, all those dudes were just absolutely tearing them up. And it ended up, I mean, the Chiefs offense looked totally different, right? It looked different than they had all season. And then the Chiefs reacted to that by going and totally replacing their entire offensive line with Keith Humphrey and bringing in Joe Thuney, trading for Orlando Brown Jr. They saw how big of a deal that was, right? And I think they missed out this year by not having enough talent on that defensive line other than Chris Jones, right? So I think that's a huge lesson for the Chargers. And also another thing to take away is just that the Rams bringing in those pieces after everyone talked about it, right? They still end up winning the whole thing. The going all in definitely rewarded them. And, you just have to hope that is something that Tom Telesco thinks about, which he probably won't. I'm not here to say it's going to change his mind, but it should open your eyes to hey, I shouldn't be holding on to my draft picks as much as, I am right now.
Yeah.
And Von Miller is a 2nd and a 3rd round pick, right? It's not even a 1st round pick. You got the quarterback. Your quarterback wasn't good enough. Jared Goff wasn't good enough to win a Super Bowl. They went out and they found the quarterback. They didn't feel like their defense was good enough for getting a good enough pass rush. They went out and got a Von Miller. They had really good receivers with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. They still brought in OBJ, even at a position of strength. The Bucs did the same thing with Antonio Brown and all the guys they brought in, bringing in Gronk, even though they had O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. We see it over and over again. Hopefully that opens up some eyes.
The embarrassment of riches, just the almost seems like they have too much talent, but that really helps you when inevitably in football you see the injuries. They pop up. They happen all the time.
Look at Odell Beckham Jr. Even with everything they added, he leaves and they're still struggling offensively, right?
But also Robert Woods got hurt before that for the Rams, and then you see.
Well, no, he was healthy when OBJ was there. When they brought in OBJ, Robert Woods was still healthy. He got hurt right after that.
I know that. What I'm saying is that Robert Woods goes down, and then you have OBJ there to help replace some of that production, and that's why having just an incredible amount of talent, it might seem like overkill, but it never turns out to be that way. I mean, you add all of that talent and then it actually comes out to help you in the long run, which
is easier said than done, adding all that talent,
Of course, but you have to be aggressive enough in your approach to say, hey, if I want to go win a championship, then I need to do what it takes to make that happen. I need to go spend the money. I need to go make the trade. I need to go take a risk. I need to do something other than what I've been doing, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, Tom Telesco, what you've done has not worked. So let's change the approach. Let's get a little more aggressive. Let's try something different, and let's see if that works, and let's see if that gets the Chargers past that finish line and into the promised land.
Yeah, and I mean, whether you look at either team, because we're talking about the Rams, but it's easy to forget in the last couple of years that the Bengals have brought in DJ Reader, right? They
Yeah,
traded for BJ Hill this year, who was phenomenal for them. They
right.
brought in Trey Hendrickson, who is one of the most underrated pass
Who's an
rushers
animal?
in the
Yeah,
league, right? They brought in a bunch of corners. They brought in a bunch of pieces. Like they
yeah,
were aggressive in filling out the spots. And I saw Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers, Locked On Now. He was talking about, yeah, I mean, you can't always build teams by bringing in all those guys. It's still the best players on the field were Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp, two guys you
sure.
drafted.
Yeah,
But the Chargers have those guys in place. They have a Justin Herbert. They have a
yeah,
Keenan Allen who they've drafted. They have a Mike Williams who they've drafted. They have a Joey Bosa and a Derwin James that they've drafted.
yes,
Adding to that, though, finding proven commodities, willing to, bring in the right guys in free agency that can make an instant impact. That's all the things the Chargers have to do. That's the recipe, David, to
yeah,
get into the Super Bowl, or at least to be a contender for it, because defense is important. Even if you watch the Buffalo Bills and Chiefs game, right, you still have to add to the defense, and having as many offensive weapons as possible. Like that's what it takes now. You have to be overloaded. I mean, the Bengals, even with the offensive line, still had Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase as like the top receiving trio in the league. So like
yeah.
all these teams have, overloaded positions. And I mean, the one thing that we know the Chargers do have is the quarterback. They don't have to trade for a Matthew Stafford because they have that, but you would like to see them be more willing to go for the guys who are more proven commodities, go for younger players in free agency that could potentially help you for years to come, and more, can't miss prospects instead of just betting on older dudes.
Well, I think it just comes down to this, Daniel. You know that you have your quarterback in place. Obviously, Justin Herbert is awesome. He's all world. Yeah. But at every other position, no matter what it looks like, it's not enough. I mean, I think that should just be the mentality. No matter what position you look at on your football team, you need more of it. You need more corners. You need more running backs. You need more receivers. You need more offensive linemen. You need more defensive linemen. You just need more.
Of course. It's funny because like when you say it like that, it seems like obvious just because it's like, yeah, of course, you always need to find as many talented players as possible, and you have to do it with the restrictions of the salary cap, and you have to hit on your draft picks, all those things. The goal is always to bring in the most talent that you can. The one thing that those teams also had, though, was a great foundation where they were already adding two positions of strength. They had the positions of strength and then added to them. They had the solid rosters and weren't content with the solid rosters and added to those really, really good rosters. And that's, I think, something that we've seen. And the Bengals did enough to where they added a lot of talent to positions of strength, right? They drafted a Jamar Chase when they already had a Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, but it's still the kryptonite of the offensive line that ends up losing them the game. And even that's a coin toss, right? I mean, the Bengals are right there to win the game, too. That is how the game ends. If you feel like if they had a better offensive line, they would have won the game, right? And instead, it's the Chargers, crosstown rivals, and I think that is, for Tom Telesco, Brandon Staley, the Chargers, it's like, I don't think the fight for LA is a real thing, really, but at the same time, it's like, obviously, if the team you're playing with is winning Super Bowls, it's not fun, right? And you want that to be you, and that has to be coming up right now. I don't care how much, Tom Telesco doesn't care about Super Bowl windows and doesn't care about Justin Herbert's rookie contract. I don't care. You know what I mean? It's like, this is
care about a Super Bowl championship. How about that?
One, you didn't do enough to put a roster around Justin Herbert, who was an elite quarterback, borderline MVP type of player in 2021, and you didn't make the playoffs because you didn't do enough on the defensive line, and on the defense. Like, you couldn't put together enough on that side of the ball to have a competitive team when you have Justin Herbert trying to drag around a 28th ranked special teams unit and a 29th ranked scoring defense. Like, you didn't do good enough. It has to change, and it has to change this year, and it has to come with big changes to me, because I just don't think you can sit on, rest on your laurels and just hope that the development of these players is going to be enough to take you to the next level.
Well, just imagine that type of performance from the offense, a top five score, top five offense out there that's just incredibly lethal with even a halfway decent defense, or a middle, let's just call it a middle, a 15th ranked defense, even a 15th ranked special teams unit. You're probably looking at a playoff team that's very, very dangerous in that situation, because that you're not putting all of that heavy weight on Justin Herbert's shoulders. He doesn't have to bail you out of every single negative situation you're in. He doesn't have to go out there and be perfect. He doesn't have to play perfect football to win football games for you. That should not be how it is. He's that good and he can do that for you, and he's done that for you, but it shouldn't be that way. It can't be that way if the Chargers want to win championships going forward.
Well, and the thing is, like, the Chargers have a good chance. Like, with all these things that we're saying, like, we don't feel like it's impossible for this team to be approaching, a top 15 defense in
No.
2022. I don't think that's very far out of their grasp, but I will say that, like, you can say it was Brandon Staley and his defensive genius that was the problem. And, Tom Telesco can come out and say, the scheme took a little longer than he thought it would. But at the same time, the only place that Brandon Staley has never found success on the defensive side of the ball was this season with the Chargers, because every other place he's been, his unit has flourished, his defense has flourished, and then he comes to the Chargers with this, roster construction and this personnel with Joey Bosa and Derwin James, and you're one of the worst defenses in the league. I mean, it wasn't enough for the Chargers, and I think that's pretty clear now that you look back on the season, but it is still exciting because just like the Bengals, just like the Rams, I mean, maybe you are a couple of pieces away from at least giving yourself a chance, right? We already know you can hang with the big dogs, right? What you need to know is, can you be consistent and always playing up to those teams' level? Can you beat the teams like the Chiefs and the Bengals more consistently? Can you not look bad against the good defenses like the Patriots and the Ravens, right? So, like, maybe those teams, those players that you bring in don't take you over the top, but maybe it gets you more consistent, because we did see a lot of these. The Chargers pass rush was good at times. Their run defense in primetime games, they give up like less than 70 yards per game. You know what I mean? Like in primetime games. So they had really, really good performances too. Maybe that's what brings you that consistency, even if it's not one player that's going to take you over the top, make you a Super Bowl favorite, But that's why these conversations are so fun, because you see teams going for it and doing it and what that can do for your organization, because the Chargers have zero, David.
And it's always wise to learn from the teams that are and have went to where the Chargers want to go. The Chargers want to win a Super Bowl championship. The Rams did it. The Bengals were in the show with an opportunity to do it. That's why it's always wise to learn from those who have been where you want to go.
And the other encouraging thing is Tom Telesco really did a great job last offseason with what he did bring in. It wasn't enough. Maybe there was just too many holes to fill.
Yeah.
He still did a really good job with the guys he brought in. A really huge hit rate on those dudes, right? One of his best free agent classes of all time.
Definitely.
All those dudes ended up working out for the Chargers, at least to this point, right? I mean, Corey Lindsey still has 4 years left, still a couple years left with Matt Filer and those guys. But, like, noticeably better. The draft class was noticeably better from what we saw. So, I mean, those are the reasons to be excited, because you feel like if they can replicate that, do that on the defensive side of the ball, do that with their draft picks this year, where you're feeling good about your top 3 picks instead of just your top 1 pick like it has been in certain drafts in the past. You're right there in the conversation, baby. And we're talking about the Chargers being a Super Bowl contender going into 2022. And that's why it's so exciting. And that's why everyone freaked out and saying this is an exciting team. As long as Justin Herbert's there, I mean, this team's going to have juice. This team has electricity all around it, depending on what you think of no matter what you think of the Chargers fan base, like, there is excitement. There is an energy around this team that something special is on the horizon, and you just have to see them take advantage of it. And that's why it's so cool that we get to be here with you guys for that journey, right? And we'll be right here to yell with you guys if it doesn't work out too, right? And to second guess all the general manager signings and things like that too. But that's just to say that we really enjoy being here with you guys, and I appreciate you checking out all of this offseason content. And we're doing an extra long show today because we might not be back on here tomorrow, but if we're not, we will be back with you guys on Thursday and every day throughout the offseason. The offseason is long. We're doing our best to find the best things to talk about every single day. We're not doing, filler lists and things like that. Always trying to bring you the freshest content, and always appreciate your guys' support. But to make sure you never miss a show, go subscribe on the new Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and follow the show for free on all platforms, wherever you get your podcast from. And if you like the show, make sure to go rate and review wherever you listen to it. But it does make a difference. It makes a big difference to us. We really appreciate that. But you can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogmeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD, as well as the show's Twitter at LockedOnLAC. Probably we'll do some more Fan Mail Friday this week. If you guys want to get your questions in, you can tag us on Twitter. You can also call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. Love you guys getting involved in the show and bringing us some really good content, so me and David don't have to pretend to get on the voicemail line and come up with fake accents and weird backstories to call in and give Chargers questions. Or will we? Maybe. We'll see. But thank you guys again for checking it out. We will be back with you guys soon. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.